So technically Gwen Stacy of Earth 616 came first, and yes, we know that. But over here at Top 10 Nerd, we are also just obsessed with Gwen Stacy's alive and thriving and also superpowered main alternate, Ghost Spider. Or she is more commonly known by one of her previous codenames, Spider-Gwen. Join us as we explore some of our favorite of her multiversal alternates. Number 10. Carnage. In the Ultimate Universe, there have been a few different versions of Gwen Stacy. My favorite of the two is her clone version, who ends up becoming Carnage. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, Carnage is also the monster responsible for Gwen's death, which makes her becoming Carnage even more dark and twisted. She ends up being cloned and bonded to the symbiote, regaining all the memories she had up until and including her death. This version of Gwen is later stated to be an exact replica by Tony Stark. Here, Gwen's personality was different from her 616 counterpart. While she was quite intelligent still, she also enjoyed causing some trouble and was more of a rebel. Before her death, Gwen had stated she wasn't romantically interested in Peter, easing the jealous mind of Mary Jane. In the Ultimate Universe, similar to the 616 reality, MJ, Peter, and Gwen are all close friends. Or they were until she died. Actually, I think they become close friends again even after, so it all works out. Number 9. Gwen Grey. We haven't seen this version of Gwen yet, but it is one of the ones we should be seeing in her new limited series Spider-Gwen Gwenverse. This series is slated to come out in February, so we haven't seen any of these Gwen alternates in action just yet. However, we have seen some pretty spiffy character designs featuring some of these alts. Jean Grey alt Gwen J included amongst them. It's also not clear if all of the alternate Gwens will be making an appearance in the series or just on alternate covers for certain comics. Gwen Grey, we can assume, will be a powerful telekinetic and telepathic mutant who will at least appear once on the alternate cover for Amazing Spider-Man issue 88, with art by Francesco Manna. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Spider-Gwens, 1. You should go pick up this Gwenverse comic when it comes out in February, and 2. You should let us know that you like it by clicking that like, and then we'll do some more Gwen lists for you. Yay! Number 8. Joyce Delaney. There have been many Gwen clones throughout comic book history ever since her fateful and tragic death. However, none of them have probably been as long-lasting as Joyce Delaney. Joyce was the first clone of Gwen made by the Jackal, simply to punish Peter Parker. Jackal, in case you didn't know, is Miles Warren, former professor of Gwen's who was in love with her. He blamed Peter for Gwen's death. In truth, Joyce, it turned out, wasn't a real clone, but simply a student of Miles's who was genetically altered to become identical in appearance to Gwen. She would for a time settle down and marry a Miles Warren clone who took the name Warren Miles. I kid you not. However, eventually Joyce, like so many other Gwens before her, would die at the hands of another Gwen Stacy clone. Clones on clones on clones. Not to say that many Gwen Stacy clones have died at the hands of a Gwen clone, but just many of them have died. Yes. Number 7. Spider-Gwen? No, not that Spider-Gwen from Earth 65, who is like the main point of this list. I'm talking about Spider-Man Spider-Gwen. Spider-Girl? Spider-Gwen? There was already a name Spider-Gwen of Earth 65 had, wasn't it? I think she was already a Spider-Girl. I don't know how to name this without making it confusing, so let me just explain it. One of the alternate covers we'll be getting for the Spider-Gwen Gwenverse comic, issue number 1, features a look at an alternate Gwen who is dressed in Spider-Man's costume, implying that we could get an in-depth look at an alternate who more literally became the alternate of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, but of course in female form, in Gwen form if you will. I personally would be interested to see this if she is one alt that does get featured. Does she have an Uncle Ben that taught her with great power comes great responsibility? Does she work for the Daily Bugle? Who will fill in as the Aunt May of her story? Will she also end up in a love triangle with an alternate version of herself and MJ? Who will be her Green Goblin? These are questions I'd love to see answered as we learn more about this alternate potentially in the Gwenverse comic. Potentially. I don't know if she'll be in it, but she's on a cover. Number 6. Abiel. Remember when we talked about Joyce being the first clone of Gwen? Turns out, retroactively at least, that she wasn't really the first clone. Abiel was later on revealed during the events of Spider Island to be the first Gwen clone that Miles Warren successfully created, at least until another clone comes along and is like, actually I was the first. Abiel wasn't too fond of clones herself and made Warren promise not to make any more Gwen clones. Well, we all know how that goes. When Abby found out about the existence of the other semi-clone of Gwen, Joyce Delaney, she killed Joyce and then confronted Miles. In the end, she ended up dead herself in an explosion when Kane Parker, a clone of Peter Parker, chose to save Miles instead of Abby. So many clones, truly. Truly so many clones. Number 5. Age of Apocalypse. This alternate version of Gwen Stacy never ends up dying at the hands of Green Goblin, and miraculously also doesn't die at the hands of Apocalypse or any of his loyal subjects either in AOA. Instead, she goes on to meet up with Dr. Donald Blake. In this universe, Blake never became the Mighty Thor and was just a doctor, an everyday hero. Blake saved Gwen from illness when she was on the brink of death, and she repaid him in kind by saving his life from a mutant ambush. Gwen would go on to act as Blake's sort of bodyguard, aiming to protect him. Gwen also ends up shaming Bruce Banner for helping Apocalypse, and in the end, he sacrifices himself to save both her and other human lives. Number 4. Prime Gwen 2.0. That's what we're gonna call this clone, who is a clone but is also the closest clone we'll likely ever see when it comes to getting a replacement 616 Gwen. She was turned into the almost Gwen by Ben Reilly's Jackal. He basically gave this clone of Gwen the memories of the previous Gwen, the real one, up until the point of her death, using her remains in order to do so. So in other words, he perfected the clone process and gave us pretty much a replacement for Gwen Stacy in terms of the one we lost. The only problem was that these clones were still, not completely perfect, they were still slightly imperfect, and they would degrade unless they took a pill that he created. This was how Ben controlled the clones, you see, making them do his bidding. In the end, what happened to this version of Gwen was left somewhat ambiguous. It's implied that she died, but it's also impossible for our heroes to tell which clones survived and which ended up as dust. They're like going around looking at the dust being like, we don't know because there were so many. Perhaps some got away with a stash of those life-saving, degeneration-preventing pills. I think it would be cool to see this pretty much new version of Gwen return someday if a writer wants to explore the idea of her surviving. This version of Gwen comes from the Clone Conspiracy story and series and isn't to be confused with Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman as she's known there, from her 65, who actually also appears in this story and also disguises herself as Gwen Stacy. So yeah, I mean she is Gwen Stacy, but she disguises herself as 616 Gwen Stacy. Clones are confusing. Alright, next one. Number 3. House of M. In the House of M reality, created through reality warping by Avengers Scarlet Witch, we get to see a version of Spider-Man's story where neither Uncle Ben nor Gwen died. Instead, Peter ends up happily married to Gwen later in life, and the two settle down and have a son together named Richie. Peter ends up a celebrity, a wrestler turned actor, and has his own corporation, Spider-Man Inc., while also being involved in lots of charity work. Gwen helps him manage his company, which also helps to free up Peter's time for other heroic activities or work. It's really nice to see an alternate reality where Peter gets to be happy and gets to be with Gwen. However, when he found out it was all a lie, it nearly broke him. So that's the downside, I guess, of this alternate reality of Earth 58163. But at least for a time, him and Gwen were happy together. Number 2. Gwenpoole. Honestly, one of the wackiest characters out there and also one of the most fun has to be Gwenpoole. Gwenpoole is a cross between Deadpool and Gwen Stacy. Her home reality I don't believe is designated as having a number yet, but the temporary reality number it has currently is 565. Though honestly, I think it's better if we don't even give it one because it's kind of like our reality. Anyways, on Earth TRN 565, that's what we want to call it, or our Earth, Gwen was just a normal girl, living in a world where superheroes only existed in fiction. However, she managed to get to the Prime Marvel universe and was able to actually pursue her dream of becoming a main character and a hero. She actually got her superhero name as the result of a mistake while having her first costume made. A lot of Gwen's abilities and powers are actually related to basically how meta she is and her awareness that she is currently living in a comic book world. It's also what makes her such a fun character to read. More recently, she was palling around with Jeff the Landshark before handing him off to Deadpool to watch over, as she knew her own self-titled series have never lasted long. She also willed herself into becoming a mutant, and as such has been spotted on the mutant island nation of Krakoa, because this is Gwenpoole, she can do that. Number 1. Gwen Stacy. The original Gwen Stacy, which technically means she isn't an alternate, but since we're focusing on alternate versions of Spider-Gwen from Earth 65, even though Gwen Stacy of Earth 616, the Prime Marvel universe, came first, I think we can counter. Many folks believe Gwen Stacy to be Peter Parker's one true love, who would still be with Peter even today and happy if she hadn't died at the hands of Green Goblin and kind of Spider-Man. Gwen shared many interests with Peter and the two ended up dating. Both her and Peter were interested in academics like science and they appreciated each other's intellectual mindsets. The only thing that really ever got in the way of their romance was Peter's secret of being Spider-Man, which often put them into quarrels over Peter's running away in the face of danger and often the times that he abandoned Gwen as well. If Gwen and Mary Jane were the Betty and Veronica to Peter is Archie, then Gwen would definitely be more of the Betty of the two of them. And that's definitely, I think, what they were going for with that whole dynamic. What are some of your favorite Gwen Stacy alternates? Which version of Gwen Stacy do you find the most fascinating? Which alternates of Gwen would you most like to learn, read, or see more of? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Till next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.